All right, thank you.
Thank you, Mr.
Appreciate it very much. Now we'll have Sheriff Regalado, and looking forward to hearing from you. I haven't worked with you, but I've heard a lot of good comments of what you're doing, so we're glad you're here with us. Okay.
Make sure and turn the microphone on.
Can you hear me? Well, first of all, thank you for the invitation. I look forward to speaking about mental health because it is such a priority, should be a priority for everyone. But as the sheriff talked about just a little bit ago, it appears that mental health has evolved in the law enforcement arena. And I'll tell you, I came on the Tulsa Police Department in 1993, and I can remember responding to suicidal individuals in houses. We'd get called by a family, and they would say, hey, our son is in there, and he is wanting to commit suicide. In 1993, what we would do is go into the house to rescue that individual from killing himself, when in fact we probably caused their suicides because we went inside in such a manner that just caused them to go ahead and pull the trigger. And it happened a lot, not because we were callous or didn't care, but because we weren't trained and we didn't understand mental illness in 1993 and probably before that. Since then, we handle private violence a whole lot different, and it's now rare when you have an individual who calls the police or a family who calls the police under the same scenario, and that happens. Now we are very good at getting people out and getting them the help that they need. The point behind all of that is, again, that law enforcement has evolved immensely, and it seems that everybody else outside has taken 2 steps back. And that is a problem. And I'm going to detail how the jails have now, and it's been mentioned, become the largest providers of mental health in the country. And you're going to see right here in Tulsa, Oklahoma, what we do for mental health. And I think it's going to be nice to hear that we're doing these things. But when you think about it, a jail is doing these things. And that's the depressing part of it all. Today, our mental health care system is fragmented, underfunded, and difficult to navigate. Mental illness often results in a vicious cycle of poverty, homelessness, and incarceration. Jails are the largest providers of mental health in the country. Recently, CDC reported that Oklahoma ranks in the top 10 in suicides per year in the U.S. Oklahoma has the highest incarceration rate, and I think we've actually come down a few notches, which is good news. And then there's some perspective stats. 1,079 out of every 100,000 people in Oklahoma are incarcerated. Number 2 is El Salvador, and that should put some things into perspective. Women in Oklahoma jails are much more likely to suffer from mental illness and substance abuse than men. Approximately 70% of incarcerated women had an actively managed or serious mental illness compared to 44% of incarcerated men. And I will tell you that in the Tulsa County Jail, that's almost reversed, and I'm not sure why, but we have more men that are in our mental health unit than we do women. A timeline of Tulsa County and the Sheriff's Office in regards to how we've dealt with mental health. In 2014, we formed the Outside-Inside Collaboration for Justice, and that was local law enforcement agencies and as well as public and private sector coming together to address mental illness. In 2015, Tulsa County adopted the Stepping Up Initiative, which is a national model whose goal is to reduce the number of individuals in jail suffering from mental illness. In 2017, we opened our mental health pods. The max capacity is 100, and I will tell you that since our opening, we have not been below capacity. It's comprised of levels 1 through 4. Levels 1 is for the individual who cannot do anything, bathe, take their medications. They're completely dependent on our mental health unit detention officers. Once they get through that, they get stabilized, they've seen the psychologists, psychiatrists, and are getting on their proper medications. Level 2 is for that individual who's starting to take care of themselves from a bathing standpoint as well as taking their medications. Level 3, they're now self-sufficient for the most part. We observe them for about 2-3 weeks, and when we believe that they are ready to move forward, they go into level 4, which is kind of a dormitory style part of the mental health unit. They're observed there for about 2 weeks, and then they are discharged into the general population. Now, part of the problem is that getting to number 4 is an issue because these individuals are either sentenced, released, or bond out, and before they complete all 4 cycles of the mental health. It is staffed with crisis intervention, CIT trained detention officers. In 2017, we made that a part of the academy. So now all of our detention officers, as they come out of the academy, are CIT trained, and NAMI does all our training for us. So it's been a great partnership, and we have seen the dividends of that on a daily basis since that time. Our mental health is comprised of a psychologist, psychiatrist, and a discharge planner. So the discharge planner, and Judge Pace mentioned it earlier, helps with the soft handoff for those individuals that are getting ready to leave our jail. They're handed into a mental health facility or outpatient treatment. The COVID-19 kind of put a dent in that for the last 2 years because we had patients that were turned away because of the COVID. So it really set us back in terms of our outpatient treatment for our inmates, but that's starting to pick back up, and hopefully that trend will continue so that we can get our inmates the outside treatment that they need. In 2019, we instituted the state's first medicated assistant treatment program, MAT, which is comprised of Vivitrol, Suboxone, and Subutex. I think we still are the only jail that employs the MAT program. And in 2021, we are getting ready to release an amendment to our mental health contract that will include a new device called Custody Protect. And essentially what it is it utilizes smartphone technology, and it's attached to a band that we will put on an inmate in our mental health unit. And what it does, and the best way to explain it, is if you've ever been to a hospital and you've been a patient, your vitals are being shown in the room, but they're also at the nurse's station. Well, the same thing will apply here. Our DOs, our detention officers within the mental health unit, will be able to look at the vitals of each of the inmates in that mental health pod, and so will our medical provider in the jail hospital. And so what happens is if an inmate, and I'll give you a prime example of what we've seen in the past, if we have an inmate who's come in and is under the influence of certain narcotics and starts to have a medical reaction to that, if it's in between our 30-minute checks and they have, let's say, a heart attack or some other medical crisis, and we've just checked them and we're not coming back for another 30 minutes, that's the time period in which we've seen people die. And now with this new device, it'll alert the pod officer to what cell it is, and it'll also alert the nurse or our medical staff. And so we're cutting out that time period in which we could save somebody's life. So we will be the first jail in the country to utilize this technology. So we're very excited about it. The next slides are, if you haven't been to the Tulsa County Jail, just view our mental health pods. The next slides, it's a diagram. Go ahead. So that's our mental health. You'll see the windows there straight ahead is where our suicide pods are at. It's been constructed so that we have one detention officer can view into each of those cells, which is a must. You have to have 24/7 eyeball on people who are suicidal. And then on the sides are level 1s, 2, 3, and then go ahead. That's a closer look at the suicide pods. Go ahead. And that's level 4. So you can see it's kind of a college style looking dormitory. I will tell you that the only mistake I would say with our mental health pods is that the largest part is level 4, when really our largest part should have been levels 1 through 3. We very rarely come to capacity in level 4, to the fact that actually we now made half of that a veterans pod to address veterans' needs and all this specialized treatment that they require. So I would tell you that the construction of the architecture was probably the one mistake we could have did better, but hindsight's 2020. Identification and assessment occurs at booking. We have questions that we ask individuals who are coming in, things like, have you had mental health issues in the past? Are you currently being treated? What medications are you on? And I will tell you that more often than not, people aren't honest with us. And so if we can't force them to tell us the truth, but what we do have is a system called My Health. And so it's a statewide system that allows us access to individuals' medical and mental health treatment history. So that for that individual who doesn't tell us that they're under a certain medication or suffer from a certain mental illness, hopefully we can get into that system and identify that and certainly treat them accordingly. We also have a first responder app. It was developed by the Outside Insight Collaboration. It's www.frscreen.com. And what that is it allows our deputies in the street to access it, and it provides screening questions and definitions, assessment procedures, placement resources, and medications. And it's used quite often by our deputies in the street. Tulsa County Sheriff's Office has a mental health unit. And to my knowledge, I think we're the only one that has a dedicated mental health unit. It's comprised of specially trained sheriff's deputies, but more importantly, those deputies are passionate about helping people with mental illness. I got to tell you that they're probably one of the more impressive units in the entire sheriff's office because of their passion and the way they deal with those that are suffering from mental illness. But you'll see some of the things that they do on top of that. Mental health pickups, identification of repeat offenders, welfare checks, and of course transportation to appointments. But they drive around in unmarked cars, because they're very cognizant of the stigma that still unfortunately exists. So when they go pick up somebody's family member, they're not drawing attention to the entire neighborhood when they roll up in marked units. And in fact, we are considering looking at a different uniform so that they're not wearing this one. Because of that, and we've talked about the transportation and doing it in uniform. And that's the whole reason we kind of have passed that legislation for the transportation of people with mental illness. But nonetheless, a very dedicated group of individuals. Just some numbers, and I think these have actually gone up, but the average annual cost to house an individual with mental illness is approximately $23,000. Average cost per person with mental illness in mental health court is $5,400. And it's been shown that mental health courts improve unemployment rates, decrease jail days, and decrease inpatient hospitalization. I will tell you that since we implemented our mental health program in the jail, we have seen a decrease in recidivism. So it does work. It does work. And I'll talk about why that I think that's working here in just a second. But really, whose problem is this? It's everyone. Just to be cut to the chase, it's everyone's problem. Not just law enforcement. But unfortunately, this problem has been heaped on law enforcement and the liability that comes with it. We should not be in this business to the extent that we are. And although I'm proud of what I just told you that happens at the Tulsa County Jail, it's unfortunate that I'm telling you this is happening at the Tulsa County Jail. It was so bad at the beginning that in 2017 when we opened, we had law enforcement agencies across Oklahoma going, hey, do you have any free beds we could take this individual to? I had to remind them we're a jail. Unless they're getting booked, we're not treating people for mental illness. But that says something to the state of affairs here in Oklahoma in regards to where you can take people suffering from mental illness. So we've become the de facto largest mental health facility in the state of Oklahoma. And if that doesn't cause you embarrassment, shame, and all those negative feelings, it should. Because it says that we've basically said mental illness means absolutely nothing in the state of Oklahoma. And that's a problem. And the thing is that we've shown success by collaborating with our private and public sector, with law enforcement, and we've shown that it works. I mean, the recidivism rate has gone down. And that's without a real, true 100% commitment from all involved. And I think if we get to that, you are going to see significant decreases in what we're dealing with now. Some of the questions, just so that you have an idea in terms of the intake screening for mental health. Again, it's simple questions, but it's observations as well. Is the patient, is the prisoner, or I'm sorry, the inmate, are they answering questions coherently? Are they being truthful? Are they currently on medications for depression, psychosis, or other mental health conditions? Are you currently thinking of killing yourself? If you answer yes to that, okay, to any of these questions in 3 to 9, then it bumps you up to a certain other set of questions. And ultimately, it's to determine whether or not, as you come into the jail, whether you should immediately go to our mental health unit, or is this something that can be handled in the general population? So we've, again, I'm very proud of the programs that we have. I've been very proud about how we've been very progressive in dealing with mental illness in the jail. But really, it's time for us to come to an end on that at some point. We can't, from a money standpoint, everything I just mentioned to you costs us a couple million every year. We can't sustain that. And secondly, again, law enforcement is not inherently in a position, and nor should we, to treat mental illness, and that's what we're doing. So anyway, if there's any questions, I'll be more than happy to answer.
Yes, thank you very much for all that information. And just one comment before the questions come in. What you showed up there is what we have in mental health clinics. You have maybe better than some of them of what we have out here in that type of situation. So really compliment you. Okay, questions? Go ahead, Kathy, you're acknowledged.
Thank you for that incredible presentation. I have had the privilege of touring the county jail there with Michelle Robinette. I don't know if she's still an undersheriff, or I think maybe not. Maybe
she's on the civilian side.
She's
now,
on the
she's
civilian
still there.
side, yes. And I'm sorry that you are so burdened with this. And you're right; it's unfair that we now have to ask police officers to now be, psychiatrists and psychologists and doctors and everything else. What would you like to see change, or what would be a good recommendation so that burden can be lifted and we don't get to the point where people with mental illness are suffering within the county jails?
Well, I think it's been touched upon, and certainly is the outside partnership with mental health facilities. I think if we can take an inmate that we are treating in the jail, and again, part of the problem is before that we can complete levels 1 through 4, they're bonding out, they're being released, or they're being taken to DOC, right? But if we can take that individual and hand them off and know that they are going to get the treatment on the back end, I think you will see, again, a significant decrease in the individuals coming to our jail with mental illness. But that's the back end part. The front end part is the same thing. If we can divert them from jail and take them to a facility in which they're going to get the appropriate treatment, then I think we're cutting it out on both ends, front and back end. Sheriff Tim talked about it earlier, about 780 and 81. He was really kind in his assessment of that. I'm not so kind to that. I think that was a sham, and people were fed BS, and that's unfortunate, because it set us back. And I will tell you that, our simple drug laws, should people be serving prison time for that? I would tell you no, okay? But what people didn't see, okay, and whether they were unintended consequences or we knew when we passed 780 and 81, is that addiction and mental illness go hand in hand. And if addicts voluntarily turn themselves in for rehab, I suspect we wouldn't be here today. But that doesn't happen. It was the criminal justice system that was the segue between criminal violations and getting rehab. Now, were we incarcerating people for drug laws? Absolutely. Okay, but was it because they had a joint in their pocket? I would tell you no. And that's the kind of lies that were put out during the 780 and 81. And all it did was hurt people with addiction and mental illness problems. And now, I will tell you, this is the conversation that happens is that if you tell an individual, hey, you are now arrested for a misdemeanor drug violation, do you want to go to jail? Do you want to get out? Do you want to go seek treatment? They're taking jail because they know they're going to be there for a day or two and then they're back out. So the hook is no longer there. And that's what's unfortunate. In talking with addiction specialists in Tulsa, they have plenty of people there ready. And they're twiddling their thumbs because no one is going there now. Once this went into play, addicts aren't showing up voluntarily. And now, since there's no criminal justice hook, they're really not coming. And so that's an issue. So, I think it's been a perfect storm, unfortunately. But it goes back to what I said earlier, is that I truly believe, and yes, I'm biased because I am in law enforcement, but the fact is that as we continue to evolve, everybody else is taking 2 steps back. And that cannot happen. And law enforcement can't be the patsy for everything that goes wrong in our society in regards to mental illness and addiction.
Representative Walker, you recognize.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm just curious real quick, talking about that level 1 through 4 and the fact that individuals bond out, plead out, whatever. It sounds to me like there's a lack of coordination there. Because if I'm a public defender and my client is in level 1, 2, 3, or whatever, shouldn't I be the first one there pounding on the DA's door for drug court or something along those lines? Help me understand where that miscommunication occurs and I guess on bonding out, that's not really possible, but...
Yeah, and that's what I'm kind of referring to as the bonding out or the release. I think where the lack of communication, or at least part of it, is being able to take that individual who's bonding out and may not have completed levels 1 through 4 and being able to hand them off to a mental health facility or treatment center, or coordinating with their doctor if they have one, and being able to ensure that they at least have a chance to continue their mental health treatment outside of the jail.
Representative Harden, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Having had the opportunity to work in the early 80s where law enforcement wasn't saddled with this, coming up to today, how much of your budget, whether it be the jail budget or your sheriff's budget, how much of your budget is dedicated now to simply taking care of people with mental issues, which that money should actually be coming from the state?
Well, we were fortunate that, and I think it was 2016, you may remember, we passed a mental health tax, 2.4% sales tax increase to allow us to build the mental health pods. The problem with that is that if you look at the mental health tax, when it was written in such a way that we could only spend that money within the walls of the mental health pods. Okay? Well, we're flush with money that we can't spend in there. Unfortunately, we've got to go back to vote of the people to extend that outside of those walls. If we were allowed to do that, we would be on some pretty good grounding. But to answer your question, specifically towards mental health, I would say it's close to $4 to $5 million when you talk about everything combined. It's very expensive. But, we've spared no expense. We have a psychiatrist, we have a psychologist, we have discharge planners. I mean, in that sense, we're really one of the best in the state of Oklahoma, and I would venture to stay in the country in regards to jail mental health. But again, I hate saying that because I shouldn't be saying that.
No. Excuse me. You may ask Representative Randleman to ask your question. Thank you. No, excuse me. Ask him.
The question is are they not your most expensive inmates?
Yes, they are. They are. And I think I had a stat in there about how much it costs. I think it's like 23, but I think it's gone up significantly. So I would say around $30,000 per inmate. And when you talk about 100, it's quite a bit.